In this nugget, we're going to focus on really four main areas. How to define a set of parameter defaults. Once you've defined a set, how to add more defaults to it, or how to remove defaults that you're no longer using. I'm also going to show you how to leave the entire set defined, but to temporarily turn them on and off if you need to. Now, I need to start by pointing out that unlike what has become our tradition, we're starting on my Windows 8 computer in PowerShell version 3. That's because the feature I'm about to show you only exists in PowerShell version 3 and later. Now, it exists on no matter what operating system you've installed version 3. So if you have a Windows 7 computer where you've installed PowerShell 3, you're good to go. But this is strictly a PowerShell version 3 thing. And so here's the basic idea. Let's say you've got a command that you're running over and over and over. Let's say I'm running get event log, and I'm running it against multiple log names. But each time I run it, I really just want the 10 newest records. And I'm just getting so tired of typing newest. No problem. There's a built-in variable called PS default parameter values. It starts off completely empty. You populate it with a hash table. Now, if you remember, we've used these hash table things several times. These exist as key equals value, semicolon, key equals value, pairs. So each key value is a pair. So the key is the commandlet name, get-event-log, it's not case sensitive, followed by a colon, followed by the parameter name. Now you do not provide the dash in front of the parameter name here. Equals whatever you want the default value to be. As soon as you set that, from now on, you can run this command again without specifying newest, and it will always default to 10 now. I can override that, right? I don't prevent myself from specifying a different value for newest. I've just said that it now defaults to 10. Now let's add, now that I've got a value in there, let's add another value to it. You've got a couple of choices. You could completely redefine this by specifying the value that's already in there and then adding a new one. I'm not ready to do that yet. I don't really want to do that. I can look at what's in here, and if I've got a bunch of things in there, I don't want to have to retype all of them every single time. So what I can do is add. Now, the syntax here is a little bit different. You give it the key, which is still the commandlet name, followed by a colon, followed by the parameter name. But now, instead of an equal sign, it's a comma, and the value that you want to be the new default. So now I can run get event log, and by default, I always get the 10 most recent entries from the application log. I can always override that. But if I do nothing, I get those by default. Now let's say I'm a little tired of the newest being pre-defaulted like that. PS default parameter values, remove, and then give it the complete key you want to remove. Get event log, colon, newest. I can check the variable. Notice how I'm using tab completion there to type that whole thing too. Super recommended technique. I can check that to see what's in here now. Now when I run get event log, it'll default to the application log, and because newest is no longer specified, it'll return everything. I can specify a different newest. I can still specify a different log name. I can override those defaults. I've simply defined those as the defaults. And what if you just need to temporarily turn this thing off? No problem. PS default parameter values in square brackets, disabled. Oops. Doesn't have to be spelled perfectly in terms of uppercase, lowercase, but a little picky. Disabled equals true. Get event log. Now that there's no longer a default for the log name parameter, I'm being prompted for it. When I'm ready to go back to using my defaults, because they're still defined, see, they're just disabled. I've got a couple of things I can do. The easiest is just to set disabled equal to false. Get event log, newest 2. It's going to default to the application log now because the defaults are active again. If we look at what's in PS default parameter values, I can see that disabled is false. Another thing you could do is just remove the disabled key. That also enables all of your defaults. Now, a trick you've got here is that when you close the shell, all of those go away. Or even if I've got that running and I open up a new second window, get event log, see, it's not defaulting to application because in this window, PS default parameter values has nothing in it. So if you've got some parameter defaults that you want to be active all the time, you would set those up in a profile script. That way, when you open the console or the ISE, or either of them, you can set that up too, your defaults get redefined every single time. And we are going to talk about profile scripts in an upcoming nugget, just so that you're aware that's one thing you might want to do in that profile script. Okay, this next technique with these defaults is really cool, but a little bit difficult to follow. Let's just start by verifying what's in here. I've got get event logs log name parameter set to application. Now, I'm going to run get service because I want to demonstrate, and the easiest way to do this is to look at the top of this list, that my computer, my Windows 8 client computer, is not running Active Directory. Contrast that with get service on computer name DC. Scroll to the top of that list. Again, it's easy just to see that this is running the Active Directory web services. So that's different. PS default parameter values add. Instead of specifying a commandlet name, I'm going to say all commandlets with a computer name parameter are now going to use the value DC. All right, we can look at PS default parameter values and see that that's there now. And if I run get service, what did it connect to? Active Directory Web Services. If I try to, let's see, I think I've got something that'll at least blow up. Let's try this. Get WMyObject class Win32 operating system. Yeah, see, I've got the firewall on my domain controller rejecting incoming WMI connections, so this ought to fail because it is attempting to connect to DC, which is not accepting the connection for that particular protocol. I didn't specify a computer name. I'm letting the DC computer name come from the defaults. Oh, and that actually was able to eventually get in and do it. Okay, well, good for it. I can override it, of course, just by specifying computer name localhost. And you'll notice that, boom, came right back. Got a different user logged on. I've got a different serial number and everything else. So we can tell it did connect to a different computer. That wildcard trick, let's do this. PS default. My tab completion went away on me. Ah, there we go. PS default parameter values, remove star colon computer name. Let's take a look at PS default parameter values. Good. You can use these wildcards in a lot of different ways. Here's my add statement again. I'll just do get dash star. Now the only thing that will apply to are get commandlets. We can look at PS default parameter values to see that that's in fact the case. I think this is just an amazing, amazing set of tricks, and I think not a lot of people know about it. This is something that maybe you're not going to do frequently on a shell-wide basis, but imagine you're setting up a script, and you want that script to routinely connect to a remote computer. Within that script, you could set these defaults. And the neat thing is, because of the way PowerShell works, if you set those default parameter values inside a script, your defaults only apply to that script. Once the script exits, everything resets and goes back to the way it was before the script ran. So it's not affecting the defaults for other scripts or for the entire shell. It's just doing it for that. Again, really useful technique, definitely something that you could keep in mind because there's a lot of instances where it could just save you a lot of typing, make your scripts more legible, more readable, easier to maintain, get a set of common settings into a central place where they can be easily switched around if you need it. A lot of potential uses here. Okay, before I let you go, there's one more set of tricks that I need to show you. We're technically going to be exploring a Windows PowerShell concept called scope. And we've got an entire nugget on scope coming up. But you're going to get kind of a brief overview of scope right now. because I need to show you how it affects a really cool way of using these default parameter values. First of all, I intend to do this with a script. So I'm going to briefly make sure that my execution policy will allow script execution. There, okay. Oops. I also want to make sure that I can successfully query services from my domain controller remotely. Okay, good, that worked. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up the ISE. I've got this up. I also have the about parameters default values help file up. So just kind of demonstrating, this is a neat way to quickly look at the syntax of this if you want to. Now the trick in PowerShell with this scope and how it impacts our using PS default parameter values is this. Inside of a script, if you have not defined a particular variable, but that same variable was defined kind of in the overall shell, then your script will inherit whatever was in the shell, right? So I'm going to do this. I'm going to actually define PS default parameter values. Now, because I'm defining it this way using the equal sign, whatever I set up in my script will override whatever is done in the shell. So I'm just really quickly going to set up a get service computer name default, and I'm going to set it equal to DC. And then in the script, I feel as if I've missed something. Yeah, because I missed a quote there. So you got to watch the color coding here. Do you notice how when I had a single quote opening this, but a double quote closing it, the color coding's kind of wonky, and you get this little curly red, like a spell check in Word. If you hover over that, it's actually saying the string is missing its single quote terminator, because I opened it with a single quote, closed it with a double. Now see, when I do it correctly, all the colors go correct and the squiggly goes away. All right, get service. So I'm going to save that as DEFPS1. But I'm not going to run it here in the ISE. I actually want to come to a fresh shell instance, and I want to run def. And it worked. Now, of course, we don't actually know for sure that it queried my domain controller, but one of the services that came back was Active Directory Web Services. So I'm going to guess that was my domain controller. However, if I just run get service here in the shell and don't specify anything, scroll to the top of that list, there's a lot more services, and one of them is not Active Directory. So that tells me get service here in the shell queried my local computer, and that's because here in my shell, PS default parameter values isn't set to anything. So now let's set it to something. I've now set the computer name parameter for get service to default to the name member. So now when I run get service here in the shell, it should query my member server, which may or may not actually work and might take a second to figure out. So that'll be a good indication for us if it's the member or not. Ah, perfect. Cannot open Service Control Manager on computer member. That's because I have a firewall up in full shields up mode, so the communications couldn't get through. But this is good. This is going to be a very clear indication for us when it's trying to get to member or not. Okay, so I've set this in the shell. If I look at PS default parameter values here in the shell, you can see that the get service commandlet has its computer name parameter set to member by default. Now I'm going to run my def script again. So this did work. That means it didn't query member. It did query Active Directory Web Services. So at the top level, here in the shell, get services computer name is set to member. But because I used this syntax inside my script, my script has its own copy of PS default parameter values, which is set to have the computer name as DC. So I've got one thing in the shell. Normally, my script would inherit that, but I have overridden it within the script. My overriding it within the script has not affected the value out here in the shell. the shell is still set to member right here. Let's comment this line out. By putting a hashtag in front of that, I turn this into a comment, so it will no longer execute. Now I'm going to run that script again. Now I got the error. So when my script does not explicitly override the shell level setting, then my script inherits the shell level setting. Now let's do this. So what I'm guessing is going to happen here is my script is going to inherit the shell level setting, but then it's going to remove the shell's get service computer name default. That means PS default parameter values should effectively be empty, which means the get service in the script should run against my local computer. So let's run the script. Now it came back really quickly and had a long list of services, and Active Directory is not on that list. So what I hoped would happen happened. But let's take a look at PS default parameter values. Now it's empty. Because I didn't set this variable, in other words, I didn't use the equal sign to create a new copy of this variable inside my script, this removal affected the shell level copy of this. So I made a permanent change to the shell level. So I guess kind of the practical upshot of this entire discussion is that you can, inside of a script, set up your own defaults. You want to do so using this syntax with the equal sign, giving PS default parameter values a complete set of defaults that you want to use inside your script. Doing that will only have those be effective for your script. It won't change any other scripts, and it won't change your global shell settings. However, if you use the add and remove syntax of PS default parameter values, you are going to be inheriting whatever came from the shell, and you are going to be modifying it, which might potentially modify things that other processes were relying on. So inside of a script, if you use the equal sign, you kind of get your own private copy of this thing that you can play with. So you could potentially set up things inside of a script. So let's say you were going to run 5 or 6 commands in a row. You could set their computer name parameters to some default value, and thus make your script easier to read by not having computer name parameters every place. However, having said that, let me give you another little example. I'm going to take this out. I'm going to re-enable this, and I'm actually going to put a couple more defaults in here. We'll put get process computer name. Now let's say that my script has got a lot of code in it. At the very top of my script, I've set up these defaults, but then I've got all kinds of other stuff going on, and I scroll down, and before long I run get service, and then I scroll down some more and I run get process, and then some more commands happen, and a little bit later I do this get wMyObject, and it has a computer name. But I didn't set a default for this one, so I actually specify the computer name's parameter. This type of arrangement can get very difficult to debug, and it gets very difficult for someone else to even understand, because they have to remember at the top of the script, okay, this command is defaulting to this computer, and this command is defaulting to this computer, and now I'm going to read, and I'm reading a bunch of code, and I'm reading, okay, here's get service. Now there's no computer name parameter here, so that's probably going to query the local computer. Oh wait, was there a default for that? Let me scroll all the way back up. Oh yeah, get service has a default. So the danger you run into on setting these default parameter values inside of a script is that you kind of make it harder for another human being to figure out what's going on. They've got to remember that that command and that command are defaulting to a specific computer, but that command isn't. And later, if they see a get process with an explicit computer name, well, that's going to override the default. So just as a practice, I personally tend to not use these PS default parameter values inside of a script very often because they create this extra burden on your own brain to have to remember exactly what's going on, or debugging and understanding the script winds up being just a little bit more difficult than it used to be. So there you have it, a short trick, but a very useful trick. I've shown you how to define parameter defaults, how to add new ones once you've created the collection, how to remove existing ones when you're done with them, and how to turn the entire set of defaults on or off as a unit without actually having to remove them individually. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.